folks. Welcome. We're just waiting for people to come online here, and we are going to get started right on time in about 3 minutes at past. So thanks for joining. We'll just keep watching you come in, and we'll officially get started in just a few minutes. Hi, and welcome everyone to critical trends in work and the modern workforce and what learning teams need to do about them. I'm Samantha, here with the marketing team at SAP Litmus, and thank you very much for joining us today. I'm joined, and I'm fortunate to be joined by David Paring, who is the Director of Research at Fosway Group. And for those of you not familiar with Fosway Group, I assume many of you are, but Fosway is Europe's #1 HR industry analyst, and they're focused on next-gen HR, talent, and learning, and we're going to be touching on a lot of those areas today. And before I hand things over to David, let me just touch on a couple of little housekeeping items. We always get a lot of questions. Is the session being recorded? Yes, it is being recorded, and you will receive a link to it shortly after we wrap today's presentation. And then also, in regard to questions, please feel free to just type your questions right in the Q&A area in the On24 interface here. And I think we'll just address the bulk of questions at the end, unless David gets brave and wants to jump in on them midway. But usually we'll wait until the end. We'll see. But please feel free, as questions or comments occur to you, just go ahead and jump them right on in there. And with that, I will hand things over to David to launch our agenda.
Okay, thanks so much, Sam, and thank you very much for having me and inviting me to talk around this. It's a huge subject, and I've got a huge deck to try and get us through in the next hour or so. So I'll try and see if I can keep us to about 50 minutes or so, and then we'll pick up. But really, we just want to pick out a few of the critical trends around workforce and work, including things like hybrid working, Gen Z, an element of organizational agility, and the pressures that are coming from what's being deemed the Great Resignation. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Reflect a little bit on how L&D is evolving to address those, and talk about some solution approaches, so practical ways that you can work with a modern workforce, from onboarding, maybe sales, to actually just developing a more skill-centered agenda around learning, which actually solves some of the problems that we're facing as we enter a new era of work. Hopefully provide some interesting catalyst for your thinking as well. But what we want to do is just sort of start off by thinking about some of the critical trends. And as I said, the first one I want to highlight is this trend towards hybrid working. I'm sure lots of you are now either transitioning back into work or you're still at home, but it was not the workplace that we probably had in thought about maybe 2 years ago. And we can see that in some of the research we've been doing ourselves over the last year. So many people have accelerated their approach to flexible working and remote working as employers. 84% in our latest survey, which has been running over the summer, has said that they're adopting that approach. And it seems to be the common way forward, trying to find this mix between people working remotely and people working in the office. And there seems to be a lot of flex between how many days you're going to be spending in the office to some extent. And one of the key reasons that organizations are doing that is about people's sense of well-being and wellness, and actually from a significant proportion of the workforce actually not wanting to do the big commute every day. But equally, it's been about productivity. Productivity has been featuring as one of the top 3 reasons why people are adopting flexible working. And just to get a sense of the scale of the sort of productivity gains, it's just 60% of organizations in a Capgemini survey, which has been running over the last 6 months or so, said that their organization had witnessed productivity gains in the third quarter of 2020 of between 13 and 24%, right? So that's a significant portion of organizations getting a really big uplift. And effectively 40%, that's like having almost another person in the team. Of a team of 5, right? So actually, it's quite a big uplift. And most of the research we picked up, and what I've tried to do is distill a bit here, shows that people have found it really easy to work on their own tasks. Where they've struggled a little bit more is on collaborative work. And that's had a sort of knock-on effect on people's sense of well-being, as we'll see. But just to give you a sense of this spread, and again, we did this survey. It's currently about 130, 140 respondents with a European focus. And just to give you a spread, right? So how many days are you going to be on site? Over half are going to have their people on site less than 2 days a week, right? So you've got 29% saying 1 to 2 days, 6% saying on site maybe twice a month. Some people just have complete discretion about where they're going to work and just say full home working, right? So there is a pretty sizable 44% who are going to be in work maybe 3 or 4 days a week or more. But actually just this flexibility of who and where you work seems to be the way that organizations are responding to the changes that the workforce has gone through, from being purely remote working into being now missing people in the office, wanting to be more connected, wanting to be working together, but actually have the best of both worlds. And I think it's interesting, right, when you think about the way that remote working has had some negative effects on people's sense of engagement, their sense of satisfaction, the stress of potentially being on 24/7, always being on. Over half say they sort of have that pressure on them. So actually trying to get a better balance in not just being purely remote working is a way of sort of maybe addressing some of that negative impact of having remote work. But also just if you're purely a remote worker, and again, this is coming from the Capgemini survey, just this sense of the pressure of burnout. And that pressure of burnout has been sort of disproportionately felt amongst younger employees. 61% say that they're on this sort of in that burned out zone. And that's a massive number, right? If you think about it, that's almost 2/3 of people. If you're in a room of, like I say, 31 to 40-year-olds, they're feeling under pressure, right? They're feeling, I've had enough. So trying to find a way of creating a work environment that enables people not to be frazzled is something that we need to think about. And partly that is this sort of migration to a hybrid workforce where actually people don't feel maybe so micromanaged, which is one of the sort of knock-on effects of how people feel in a purely remote working environment. And just this sense, I think, from people who've joined organizations, and there has been people who've been recruited and never met their teams, right? And I'm sure in your organization, you've had that sensation. That actually people feel a bit lost. My wife works for a health organization in the UK, and she's onboarded people that she's never met face to face. I've got people in my team, or should I say at Fosway, that I've never met face to face. There's 4 people. And you just think, okay, where did they go? We've not really connected. And that sort of miss of connection is partly the reason why hybrid working is going to sort of continue to surge to some extent. And what the balance is between should you be in all the time, should be 1 day, 2 days a week, is where I think organizations are trying to find their feet. But it is a disproportionate view of where people want to work depending on their age. So Sam, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to sort of add to that in terms of the sense of the hybrid workforce. I guess it's something that's been experienced in your SAP Litmus and how work's evolved there.
Oh, this trend is resonating with me personally very deeply, David. So we're fortunate at SAP to this year, the company has pledged to a flex work model. And as many of you on today's meeting know, I mean, SAP has more than 100,000 global employees. So you can imagine that there's just not a one-size-fits-all model that's going to work. And so it's really, really cool that the company this year rolled out. And it really is a pledge. It's a commitment to flex work. And what that means is for us, it's, well, and I should say it was based on surveys that SAP did of us, of the employees, and the company asked people, you know, very similar to your previous slide, David, about like how many days a week do you want to go in? Do you want to go in at all again? You know, do you want to go in 100%? And I can't reveal publicly our specific numbers from the surveys, I don't think, but I will tell you pretty darn close to what you're sharing, that people really enjoy this hybrid work model. And after the survey results came back to the top leadership at SAP, they saw that people really want this. People want the ability to make their own schedule and choose. And what I can share publicly about the SAP flex work model is that it is 100% flexible. They really are saying it really is up to the unique individual to say that, you know, within reason, of course. I mean, within reason, you have to do your job. But and then the other thing that I would comment on is that there is specific reference to that. It is a trust-based model. So it's a trust-based, like you're saying, the fear of this micromanagement or this the anxiety of being always on. What SAP is saying is like, no, it's a trust-based model. We trust that you want to do your job. You are doing your job. You're not going to be micromanaged. And that is so empowering for employees. I can say that, you know, personally, like I said, this is really resonating with me. So pretty cool. And people love it. And the survey results showed that.
But what's interesting, I think, on the flip side of that is that sense of, actually, this is uncharted territory for many organizations. So how we really make it work, what's the balance? Does people come in on the same days? Do you have a spread of days? How that really works as a team, and not just one team, but teams of teams. How do you set up working environments so that if you're in the office and you're doing a virtual meeting, do you sit at your desk and everybody has their own screen, or do you sit in a room? How does that impact people who are remote? So many of these things are a little bit, we've got to find our way. And I think that's also part of the onus on us as learners and teams to work out what works for us. But this flexibility, I think, is key. We've seen some great articles where people say, if you're not going to offer me flexible working, I'm going to find somebody who can. And that's linked into maybe one of the subsequent trends. Yeah. But the other trend I want to sort of... sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Dave. I was just going to say quickly on that is that, that's been another trend we've seen even in some of the training courses is that it's uncharted territory for managers, like you're saying. So managers have to learn how to now manage remote teams or hybrid teams, which is a new challenge.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to upskill our people to be able to manage for that change. So something to sort of focus on almost as part of your core HR, L&D agenda is to make people have the skills to cope with the environment that they're now operating in. The other thing that comes out, and this is something that would have happened anyway, if that makes sense, but it's been accelerated and the disruption has been sort of almost amplified by the pandemic, is the entrance of Gen Z or Gen Z into the workforce. Gen Z or Gen Z are the people who were born sort of from the late 90s through to the early 2010s, and they are just entering the workforce now. What a hard time, right? If you've never had a real working office job and you're coming for the first time out of university or college, to be entered into work when you're not even going to work. What they found to some extent is this sort of community, this Gen Z, and this is highlighted in a report from Microsoft, and I've left the link in here just so you can see that really, really clearly, is that they've been suffering to some extent the most in terms of the negative impacts of the remote working. And to some extent, the whole shift to hybrid and remote working has hit Gen Z, women, frontline workers, those who are new to their careers. They're finding it hardest at the moment. And the reason they're finding it hardest isn't just because actually there's like a tsunami of digital interactions that everybody's facing. There's more meetings, more documents, more emails, more informal Slack communications. It's gone ballistic to some extent. But those sort of 18 to 25-year-olds and new entrants into the workforce, they're more likely to be single. They're more likely to be early in their careers. They're more likely to feel the isolation of home working. They're struggling to find motivation because actually they're young, enthusiastic, but they don't get that firing off people around them. They lack some of the financial means to create a proper workplace at home. And that creates some sort of interesting sort of negative challenges. And what is probably worth thinking about is this comment that I picked up from a lady who's been profiling the generations into the workplace. And I first saw her speak in about 2018 at a legal conference of all places. And she was just talking about the different life expectations of different generations, from the boomers through to the Gen X's, the Gen Y's, millennials, and then the Gen Z's. And she said the Gen Z group, on her reflections over the last year, are the group that want to come back into the office. They want collaboration. They want mentorships because they want to feel invested in, want to be part of that sort of high growth, high investment in me community. So they want to be in the office. Whereas the older generation, grey hair, who got bored of the commute and are home from the office, maybe they've got other caring responsibilities around children, parents and things like this, actually they're happy to work from home as often as possible. And that's where the pushback around quite a lot of the return to work has come from. But you could end up this scenario, she says, where you get the kids that ruling the office for 3 days of the week and the adults turning up for 2 days of the week, right? So, and she's just saying, sort of prompting us to remember that actually we need to rethink the way we train, we coach people, how we enable people to interact with this generation. And that means being much more learning bespoke, being much more high-end when we need to be, and that means investing time and face time with people, but also being on demand. So trying to find this balance for that community so they don't feel disaffected, they feel orientated and don't want to leave. Because ultimately, the Gen Zers are those guys who are most likely to want to walk out the door because they're on that high cadence of moving my career forward. So there's a really interesting sort of lot of a convergence of pressure around that particular group. Again, Sam, I'm not sure if that's something you wanted to pick up on.
Well, yeah, and I think it's interesting that from a training perspective that there's actually some good news here from the very biased e-learning market that I live in. The good news is that, as you mentioned, many of the Gen Z people may have been in college during the pandemic or coming out of college. So these are people who are going to be very willing to embrace hybrid training, hybrid work, very willing to embrace e-learning in general and some balance. Like you were talking about the balance. Yes, they want to be around other people in the office, but it's pretty cool because these are also the same people who aren't going to be intimidated by an LMS. They're not going to be intimidated by mobile learning. They're not, they're going to, and in fact, may prefer it to some degree. So it's kind of an interesting, it's an interesting balance.
Yeah, it's interesting. After the reflection, I've been doing some interviews with organizations around their approach to performance management. And I had a great conversation with a guy who was Schneider Electric. And he said that what you have to realize around Gen Z is sometimes they prefer just to have a text exchange with you than they would spend an hour talking to you in an office, right? So trying to find this way of interacting on their terms to bring them into the workplace, help coach them and move them forward is something that is not subtle, right? It's something that you really need to get into the detail around to make it really effective. The other great trend, which is probably worth highlighting, is this sense of the Great Resignation. And I know it's a hot topic in the US, especially, and there was a report at the beginning of the year from the guys at Microsoft, same one I highlighted earlier, and they talked about 41% of people looking for new roles. And for Gen Z, that went up to 56%, right? Now, that's quite a big number. In some ways, I'm surprised it's not higher, because ultimately, if you want to get a higher pay rise, between 10 and 20%, you typically have to go outside your organization. If you stay in your organization, you tend to only get about 3 or 4%. So actually, I'm surprised there isn't a higher interest in looking for jobs elsewhere, but it seems to be building momentum. And there was a really interesting article from the guys at Wired magazine, and they talked about the Great Resignation is here and no one is prepared, right? And this was an article, a European article, which referenced some research by an organization called IFO in Germany. And what they were seeing is that more than a third of all companies were reporting a dearth of skilled workers. They're looking for more people to fill jobs than they can get their hands on. And this took a dip last year, but it's on the rise now. Some people are saying that actually, no, that this big resignation isn't going to come to Europe, but pretty much the consensus seems to be that actually it will come eventually, if only because if the economy picks up, demand for resources, demand for great people is picking up too. And what's interesting is you look at this chart, you see across all industries, across the entire economy, things are bubbling along at sort of quite an interesting rate of a lack of skilled workers. People sort of suddenly cut back on their demand. And then in the last, 3 months, it's gone through the roof. And that, I suppose, opportunity. I think there was something about, in the UK papers, only a couple of days ago, they were talking about 1 million skilled vacancies that weren't being filled. So the demand for people is huge. Their ability to move, because that's flexible working, makes it easier to work anywhere in the world now, is higher. So how you attract people, how you onboard them if you're going through this growth, but also importantly, how you retain people becomes really, really important. So that sort of sense of the Great Resignation coming this way into Europe especially is something that even if you don't think it's coming now, I think it's going to come as the economy picks up. So again, Sam, I'm not sure if that's something that you see resonating with your experience or your view from other customers from SAP Litmus.
Well, definitely. And again, to just pull in the training perspective, there's a ton of research out there right now, as you well know, about training. Training is one of the biggest retention strategies or tools that companies are using to, particularly as we're speaking about Gen Z or millennials, particularly in that group, training is a major retention technique, because these are often people who are, they're young in their careers, they're looking to carve out a career, carve out a career path from early on. And so if the company doesn't offer a really specific training program, I've even read a stat about that I think it was millennials, not Gen Z, but they were actually more interested in career development even than other benefits like salary, which is kind of surprising. But just because I knew you were going to be talking about this, David, I did pull a stat. So this is a LinkedIn thing. Cool. So I'll pull a quote from LinkedIn. It says nearly a quarter of millennials and Gen Z workers say learning is the top item that contributes to their work happiness. And this is the big part. More than a quarter of them would leave their job if they did not offer a chance to learn and develop. Yeah. More than a quarter. Yeah. So, we're just seeing that with the Gen Z thing, but clearly, I mean, neither you nor I are in Gen Z, and it's not specific just to someone's age. I mean, we all want to develop, personally, professionally. And so there are benefits for people who are more senior in their careers as well. And then I wanted to also point out one last thing, because I think you touched on this, that it's very expensive for companies to replace people, and not only expensive, very time consuming, labor intensive to find the right people. And I found this stat, this is from Huffington Post, but I found a stat that it's a 24% higher profit margin can be the result of companies who invest in training. And that's in regard to the cost savings as it relates to the money lost in replacing people. So 24% higher profit margin.
It's huge. And it's interesting. I know there was some research from the guys at PwC a while ago, just before the pandemic, and they were saying the impact of not having the right skills was really debilitating organizations and their ability to pursue new product lines, take advantage of new regions, new initiatives, and it was stifling their growth. So this sense of investment in people is something that has been front and center for organizations as well. So, and again, this is the number 4 trend, just to pick out, as this sense of organizations are getting really serious around upskilling and reskilling. And over the last year, a lot of that was driven by redeployment. So actually people's particular business lines closing up, and rather than just losing people or furloughing them, what they did is said, actually, we've got increased demand over here. Let's take your skills. Let's take you from being maybe in a retail bank and put you into the back office, and you can handle people's calls. We're not going to lose you. We're investing in you as an organization. And that seems to have sort of really been a spark. And it's quite interesting. We saw some things very sort of from our research. We did this at the tail end of last year, beginning of this year. And HR people were saying, yeah, the skills-based projects that we've got happening in our organization from an HR point of view have really accelerated. And they were talking about maybe 3 to 5 years acceleration compared to where they thought they were going to be. So the pandemic being a real catalyst for saying, actually, we need to take skills really seriously in how we apply people and make the most of people in our business, how we develop them, build up future skills. And it's quite interesting, again, in the sense that it's not just about the hard skills. You might think it's just the technical skills of we need more programmers, we need people who can work with AI, we need more analysts and people who are good at analytics. Actually, it's also about soft skills becoming more important and how you foster collaboration. And I love this phrase, and this is from one of the submissions, saying it's all about communication, creating an environment of goodwill, indulgence. And I don't know if I've ever heard the word indulgence in a work environment, right? But I think it's just that sense of being really bonded and grounded and connected with the people that work with you that creates that virtuous circle of really releasing people's energy and optimizing how they work. But what we know, again, from our research we did last year was actually 65% of organizations think they've got significant gaps. Most people don't believe they've got a good understanding of the skills in their organization, and most think having consistent framework. So you're not comparing apples and apples in your organization around even what a salesperson is and can do. Use different languages, different taxonomies. So it becomes really complicated. And that's creating even more pressure because actually only 5%, it's like 5%, very small number, think they're effective at matching their existing teams to the work that's available within their organization. And again, just thinking about how do I keep people, how do I retain them, how do I invest in them, how do I think they've got, help them build a sense of having a career here. Actually, we don't know who we've got here, so we can't encourage people to move. And just this sense of such a small number have an integrated link of skills into other parts of the employee cycle, actually consistent use of people's skills and capabilities to reboard them, onboard them. There's so many gaps. And it's something that is front and center because there is a war for talent that's been going on for the last 20 years from McKinsey's label, and it seems to be heightening again. People can easily get paid more just by looking for another job potentially, or and that more may be not just about being paid more an hourly rate, but it might just be better work-life balance. So this whole sense of flexible working, hybrid working, demand for talent from the Great Resignation, wow, and Gen Z, it's becoming very complicated. And you got to respond. So again, I don't know if there's something you want to add to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, this one really resonates, as many of you probably on the webinar today know. We at SAP Litmus not only our solution suite isn't just the LMS. We also sell a very robust content library. And I am not trying to be salesy. This really is very, very true that in the past year, we have seen a major uptick. And I'm referring back, David, to your comments on soft skills. There's been a shift there. I mean, we still see, of course, people are using the sales mastery courses and the customer service excellence courses and some of what would be more considered the hard skills and, of course, compliance and all that kind of stuff. But we've seen recently a major uptick in some of the areas of what would be considered, quote unquote, soft skills. We track, of course, what our most popular courses are. And I made a note that in the last year, some of the top courses out of the SAP Litmus training content library were communicating effectively. These are actual course titles. Wow. Communicating effectively, listening skills, managing stress, the mindful leader. I love that one. The mindful leader. So we've seen that shift. And then I also would note that I saw another LinkedIn report recently. So this is all just right in line with the research that you're doing at Fosway, David. I saw another LinkedIn report that said that from an HR recruiting standpoint, soft skills are now actually the #1 thing that people are looking for, because the idea is, well, I can train someone to do a hard skill. And now we're seeing, well, if people come in and they say, well, I already have training on certain soft skills, quote unquote, I'm not a big fan of the term soft skills, but the top in demand soft skills from a LinkedIn report this year were adaptability, collaboration, creativity, emotional intelligence. I mean, this is just, can you imagine? We wouldn't have even been talking about this 5 years ago.
Exactly. But I think it's fascinating, right? And I always think about skills, people get caught between hard skills and soft skills. I tend to think of skills as being the skills that help you get things done, right? So I need to create a report, I need to work on things. And then there's the skills to make things happen. And I think so you can think of almost the getting things done skills are the technical skills, but the making things happen, how you energize people, how you get them behind you, how you influence, how you communicate, how you really listen and reflect on what's being said. Those are the making things happen skills, because it's easy to blunder on and have no followers, right? And I think we're in this age of almost trying to sort of switch our leaders into not necessarily being people who lead, but people who create followership. And that means a different relationship. And I think that's something that sort of comes through. But what I'll do is I'll just flick on a little bit, because I think we're at the top of the hour. So we're sort of speeding through the deck. Just give you a sense of how organizations are shifting. And I think this is just useful, because I think it just gives a little bit of a backdrop to what we're going to talk about when we talk about what needs to change with L&D. Because actually you're a subset of the organization. Actually, you need to be thinking about the context that you're in as much as what you're going to do as an L&D function, right? So what I want to do is just pick up on some things. And what I've done is I've tried to pull together a number of threads from organizations almost before the pandemic who were working on a hybrid way. Because this, in some ways, for some organizations, hybrid working is not new, right? I've worked from home for 10 years, right? So, and it's a bit, I have to sort of pinch myself a little bit to remind myself that actually the pandemic happened. Yeah, I had all the disruption of the kids being at home, but my work didn't change because we've been working in this sort of way for a long time. And what I've tried to do is pick out some of the threads from organizations that have been working virtually for a while. I would reel them off, but I think it's probably better just to say, these are some of the key things. And like you said, Sam, that sense of trust, I think of all the things that underpin a successful hybrid working organization is that trust culture. But in order to make hybrid work, you have to rethink work. You have to think about how teams come together, how they don't. You have to think about how you devolve ownership to people to be empowered to make decisions. You have to think about, what does flexible working mean in your environment? Is it the hours? Where are the core hours? Where are they not? If you're working in a global team, do we just work asynchronously and always pick up each other's conversations? Where are the boundaries? So that whole sense of rethinking work, the sense of a frictionless experience. So how do the systems join up around how we work and how we learn and how we use HR? How does that work? And then also just innovating so that Actually, our process around HR are all about being online, that we've got much more persona focused, and that we've got this sort of maybe a bit more agile mindset. And what I mean by that is think in the sort of agile mind of sprints and scrums and minimum viable products, but being project-based in a way, and the sort of collaboration that comes through that. But and also that sense of almost, what do they talk about, sort of minimum viable experiments. So being much more experimental, maybe less risk averse to some extent. And those are some of the things which you couldn't really wrap a learning strategy around, but you have to be mindful that this is also how you have to support your business going forward, because lots of organizations don't know how to make this work. And if you're going to be a hybrid workforce, you can't use the old practices of what it means to be a manager when then people are just in your office. You've got to behave differently. The organization needs to function differently. And what I'll do is just segue. Again, Simon, if you wanted to chuck anything in there, feel free to. But well, I can skip on.
I don't have anything particular on this, cool. other than it's exactly what we're seeing, and this is sort of the world we're living in now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's interesting, right? Just that sense of, do you step back and think, what am I doing to help build a trust culture? What am I doing to help people really optimize their work now? What are best practices around how we work as a team? And I'll come on to those a little bit later. How frictionless is it for people to get to my learning? Be that the talk programs, the structured programs that I take people through, how accessible is that? And what innovation am I bringing that makes it easier for people to engage with HR, learning, and how are we helping reset people's mindset? And I think there is something about, as an HR function now, overall, of which L&D might form a part, we're in the game of energizing our people, and that means about providing them with the skills and the enthusiasm to do what they need to do. We need to optimize people, so help them align around goals and help people manage their time better and stuff like that. But we also need the intelligence to know how they're feeling, where are they at, what's happening in the organization around particular initiatives, and communicating that effectively. But from an L&D point of view, sorry, go on.
Quickly, David. I think this kind of ties back to the SAP Flex work model that I was talking about earlier. Is that look at all the factors on this slide. I mean, look at all the different pieces. Is that there's just not a one size fits all model anymore. Yeah. And like you, I too have worked from home for years. Working for a global organization. And it was really interesting to see in the last year and a half, people who were not used to working from home, people with young children, just the different situations that affect someone's reality and someone's actual employee experience. And again, there's not a one size fits all model. This idea of all these different areas to be able to really give someone the unique experience that they need in order to be successful, and it's challenging.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that fragmentation of work that we're seeing in organizations where actually you used to have just a job role, now you're participating in projects, and sometimes those projects span different parts of the organization, sometimes you've got a matrix reporting structure, and those are things that maybe people haven't been used to in the past. But in terms of L&D, how are they evolving? I think there's some interesting things. And what I'll do is I'll go through some of these really quickly before we dig into some of the solution bits. But the first one I want to pick out is just educating managers. And there's some interesting things that I picked up on my journey around situational leadership, which help managers get a much better idea of when they need to be directing, when they need to be coaching, when they need to be supporting, and when they need to be delegating to their people. And if you haven't come across situational leadership, do check it out. I've included the link here. Put it into Google. I think it's something that helps managers start to flex their style. And a lot of that is flexing to say, if you've got a new person who's for their first job, you probably need to be directive and don't be so supportive, but just tell them what they need to do in order to be more effective or to complete their tasks. And as you get them up to a stage, what you can do is actually be also more supportive and get into that coaching role. So that's that sort of sense of where do you need to put how do you need to flex your style as a manager? And I think that's something that we should invest our time in. What we also need to do is help managers connect with some things you talked about, Sam, around sort of being much more empathetic, being much more wellness-centered. And there's a management sort of practice called servant leadership, which is from the 1970s. And it's all about just encouraging people to have a much better relationship around work, to build organizations a little bit more just, a little bit more caring. And it seems to me that given all the stresses and strains that we're all under or have been over the last year, this is really helpful. But just look at some of these like principles around listening, empathy, healing, awareness, all that sort of emotional intelligence, sense of building community, thinking of sort of stewardship and persuasion. This is not a telling organization, and that falls back into the trust. If you want to enable the trusting culture, you do have to have a different management style. And I think this is one, again, there's a great video from Jonathan's website. I've included the link down there, which may help you just get to terms with that if you haven't come across that before. The other thing I'd encourage people to think about is just what it takes to be a high-performing team. The DNA of high-performing teams has not changed. And this is a great diagram from Julie Rogers that I've used. But how we facilitate that has changed. So we do need to still relieve these people's passions. We do need to have a strong sense of purpose. We need to develop their skills and values, make sure they're aligned. But actually, high performance now, when what it means is trying to create this balance between how we communicate in a flexible working environment where people aren't always in the office, how we create meetings that work when some people are in the office, some aren't, how we align accountability when people are open to maybe not being tracked or being micromanaged. How do we create that working process that really works? But also try and create this sort of change management mentality of how have I got enough insight and a strength of relationship around empowering my people to make better decisions and take more ownership? Have I got an understanding of where they are so I can influence them more successfully? Am I supporting them? Am I developing them? Am I really empowering them around their commitment? And I think that those are some of the things that we probably did that okay when we were in the same offices at the same time. Now it's open in a hybrid world, a more flexible working world. We probably need to revisit that in terms of our own organizations to say, is this working? And it's almost like a little matrix, I think. It's a great model that you could almost say, in terms of our teams, where are the gaps and how are we going to fill them? And that's something, a discussion that teams could have themselves. But another thing we've seen from organizations, and this is something I picked up from the guys in Norway called Telenor, who are a Norwegian telecommunications company, is they take a different way of how they manage projects, how they manage performance. They use what's called a tight, loose, tight approach. So they're tight on why, and they're tight on the outcomes they expect, but they're very loose on how the work gets done. So they say, go and deliver it for me, make it happen. But they're also tight on the follow-up, and that's structured and timed and scheduled. And they just are tight on the evidence. So you get this sort of sense of there's flexibility in how things get done, but ultimately there's some points in time when we're going to just get together. And I'm there as a servant leader or a situational leader to help you on your way. And I think that's a really nice model. They've been using that, and they used that before the pandemic. They've been using it after. If you go to the World Economic Forum, they talk about this a lot, and it's something that's worth picking up. The other thing we're seeing in terms of learning teams focusing on, besides sort of high performance and changing managers, is this sense of thinking about the sort of learning that's being delivered and using this sort of 5 moments of need from Bob Mosher. What's new, what's more, how do you help people apply and solve? What it does is it helps try and stretch your learning approach beyond just being formal into those informal moments. How do you create things which are much more reference and support when you're on your own or you're away from people? How do you create more supportive learning that enables people to get things done rather than just being pre-courses? And I think that's something, again, to have a think about how you're creating a more context-centered approach. The other thing is just this sense of learning cycles. How do I create a community of learning that is about some input, and which could be an online course or watching a colleague do some work, then taking that learning and apply it myself, put it into action? How do I then get feedback from other people? How do I reflect on that and think, okay, what am I going to do differently next time? And which is almost a continuous coaching model to some extent. And just think about how that works in our sort of new working environment. And the other thing we've seen is people thinking about how they build skill-centered people strategies, and the text doesn't maybe stand out as well as it should do, but skills is central behind being much more inclusive of people in your organization, is behind being able to put them on the right jobs at the right time, It's about how you structure feedback to enable people to grow their skills and understand their weaknesses. It's about whole upskilling to enable people to take advantage of new opportunities. It's about employability. It is probably one of the central strains that we're seeing lots of the HR systems providers really focus on, because it enables what you talk about as being talent mobility. So those are some of the things that we're seeing almost at a broader HR strategy level, people doing. Uplift manager skills, push things forward really significantly around team working and thinking about being more skills orientated and much more about maybe a human learning cycle, learning process, which is not just about delivering new learning, but connecting people to mentors and follow-up and feedback. So how do we do this in terms of solutions? What we're doing in the last 10, 15 minutes is just talk you through some of the solution processes, approaches that we've seen. And I just want to highlight some of these as almost 8 ways to deliver more flexible learning for flexible workers. And I think that sort of phrase, flexible learning for flexible workers, is probably something that you could probably calibrate your own operation, your learning delivery team or learning team around at the moment. It seems to make sense to me, right? If everybody's flexible, how is our learning operation going to flex as well? So the first thing is to think in the grand scheme of things about how you connect learning to other parts of the HR story. So what I'd pick out by that is learning is one of these sort of bubbles which you could see next to career mobility. You don't really get career mobility without understanding what learning will take you there. So trying to use skills as the linchpin for that is really important. Actually, if you want to understand what skills you have, then actually the assessments that you have within your learning portfolio may help, but actually performance and feedback is a good way of gearing up around skills. And the more intelligence you can bring to that relationship, actually, the easier it is then to connect to future career moves. Actually, well-being can be linked to skills as well, and people's feedback. A sense of reward and recognition might be about skills as well, but trying to link across these sort of pillars of, it's not just about having a learning function, but linking learning into career mobility, linking learning into performance feedback, linking it into onboarding and recruiting, linking it into workforce management. So the people who've upskilled themselves or got recognition of skill are then put on the next set of projects is something that if you're not involved in doing, I would encourage you to be talking to other parts of your HR silos to address. The other thing I'd encourage you to do is think about having maybe a bit more person-focused, a persona-focused maybe approach to learning. In the past, many people have focused primarily on formal learning, this orange zone, as how they deliver learning. And what we've seen a lot around e-learning over the last 18 months or so has been that people have virtualized that. So they put it into a virtual classroom as it used to be in the classroom. Actually trying to think more broadly about your learning, as we sort of alluded to in the previous section. So think about how you take learning to the workplace, how you create more collaboration points. There is something about how you think about the touch points, whether that's in the corporate workflow, whether that's in workspaces. How do you link your learning into Microsoft Teams, for example, or Slack, so that people can get access to it at the right time? How are you linking it into performance support, so that actually, if I need to know how to tighten that widget or use that piece of machinery, I can start to see the training that would help me complete that particular task. Or if I want to talk about that product, I can look that up easily, so make search really easy from within the workflow. These are things to sort of think about, again, about where's your balance. And this isn't necessarily a representation of a perfect balance, just saying, if you had a third, a third, a third, then where would you put your time? And how representative is what you do yourselves at the moment? But thinking about those touch points is really important. The other thing that I
David, may I before you jump in? I wanted to comment because this is really resonating. Of course, at Litmus we talk a lot about personalized learning and personalized learning paths and all that kind of thing. But even going back to your the slide before that, when you're talking about the HCM model. My colleagues at SAP SuccessFactors have actually coined the term, which is really more of perhaps going to be a space, which is not HCM, but HXM. Yeah. So HXM is human experience management. And but it ties exactly into what you're talking about. You referred to human-centered approach. person focused learning. Well, this is exactly what sort of HXM is getting at. It's what we call at SAP, we call it the whole self model, which I love that term and learning is part of it, but this is even in the broader HR context, but it really is about, the whole person. It's not just, again, you're a cog in the wheel, you just go in and do your little job and on your way. You're not a cog in the machine. You really, that an organization at this point, especially with technology, does have an ability to actually match the individual to their optimal environment, both as far as training and as far as job. And that things that, again, 10 years ago, when companies just basically didn't care. But now companies are thinking about the long-term success of their people and the retention of their people. And they're thinking about things like increased job satisfaction, increased commitment to the organization. They want to feel like they have a purpose. And back to the Gen Z thing, a lot of the Gen Z people say, I don't want to work for a company unless I agree with their purpose. So there's a deeper sense of that. Well, the whole self model of well, I don't want to go work for that company because I really don't like the way they treat people. I don't like what they do, or I don't have opportunities to learn. I don't have opportunities to further my career. So I love this idea, of having it, person focused, HXM, whatever you want to call it. But it's really
exactly.
Cool. It's really cool.
And what I love about what you talked about there is that sense of, again, this wheel here, there's a whole section in that sort of workplace learning which talks about mentoring. So how do you connect people to people? So there's the cells can come together a little bit. And I think that's something that if you think about, they've got the Gen Z who want to be in the office and being supported. They want to feel part of a community. You've got people in this part of this great resignation who may feel disconnected. You've got people under pressure. It's this part, a sense of how do we connect people as part of that mentoring process is something that could be really, really valuable, right? It's something that really both builds skill, but also builds the connection in the organization. I think that's something that's really powerful.
We use the line at Litmus. We say connect, greater purpose and performance. It's not just performance; it's purpose and performance. And in fact, purpose often drives performance.
And that sort of connection between purpose and people feeling passionate about that purpose needs to be infectious. And I think you will start to release that through mentoring and buddying and day-to-day feedback. They become really important. The other side of this is actually just reflect or breaking the learning model a little bit and think about how you embed performance support into learning. So how do you create guides? How do you enable people to say, how do you enable them to capture the sort of best and say, this is how things get done really well here? So that sense of having videos, just-in-time support, being able to search to that point in the video that says, this is how you adjust this particular part of the carburetor. This is the torque pressures that you use. This is how you set the span or whatever it happens to be. Actually, that embedded support takes some of the pressure off people remembering and being together at the time. So you can have maybe a little bit more of a compressed learning experience, but know that people are supported in the moments that matter when they're back in the office or back at the workspace, back on the front line, right? Which is those places where people have suffered the most. So using that sort of digital capture of, and people are used to doing that right now. So you've got Instagram, you've got Snapchat, you've got loads of social media, YouTube, trying to create that through teams, even not just individually capturing experts, is something that I'd really help think about. And this is about search and support. So helping people find the stuff is as important as creating the content that you make available. And that's something that we haven't necessarily always seen from platforms. The other thing is just think about this personalized learning journey. So helping people navigate their way through, and maybe that's driven by AI, maybe it's driven by their aspirations, their role, but trying to find some of these frameworks, maybe it's linked to their future jobs that they're interested in. Actually trying to surface a pathway through. One of the sort of great criticisms that we often hear of learning platforms is there's too much. I don't know what to do next. So trying to find that personalized pathway, and you can use things like diagnostic tools to say, quiz yourself, where do you want to be 5 years time, what are your career anchors, what you enjoy, For you in your current role, what are your options? Help people explore that, but also give them the frameworks. Now, there's a lot of things that are happening in AI, and I know success factors are also part of this movement, where actually it's not something as a learning team or an HR team you have to build. Actually, what's happening increasingly is the AI is stringing some of those pathways together based on other people's experience and the availability of resources, be that courses, look up mentors, and gigs and projects that you can get involved in. So this is becoming a much more fluid, much more open, much more democratic, and much more accessible, skills-based approach, which I think you have to sort of be aware of, right? You used to have to think, I've got to create job families and might link them all up. I think within 2 or 3 years, most people will have functionality that will do that for them. And it's being made available now amongst organizations, including SAP. So that's another big one that I just picked up the item. The other thing is just this sense of rehearsal and practice. I just want to highlight this one because I think it's a really key one, just in terms of, in order to help people put the right amount of attention, to help them provide some element of angst and enthusiasm and make it feel like a moment that matter. Actually, to make learning really stick, you need to help people have purposeful practice. And there's some interesting things that we're seeing. So people are already starting to use, I was going to call it, so like virtual environments based around difficult situations. So for example, in this image here, you have maybe one of your more mature workers who you've got to lay off, right? If you're a manager and you've got to go through that scenario, how you handle that situation, you don't necessarily want to be pitching up and trying to do that for the first time without having practiced. What this simulation enables you to do is see the emotional reaction of particular choices, right? And you can try and make your best choices, and it will still get you wrapped up, right? And it is incredibly visceral. It really drags you in, even though you may start off thinking, well, it's just a character, but it doesn't take much of a leap to think, actually, that could be Joan, it could be Peter, it could be Sarah, it could be David, right? That I've got to give this bad news to, and I wouldn't like it if they felt like that. So enabling people to rehearse for some of those situations, some of the things they may not want to say, what they do want to say, is really interesting. And the options to have people also watch you, even though they're not in the room, handle those situations. So you can almost have a virtual environment with an invigilator or a coach watching you as almost like a god figure and they're floating in the background, right? Is really interesting because not only can you interact with the individual and see where that takes you, but you can also get some feedback about your delivery, and this is increasingly smart. And what you have to realize is people are using video assessments already to filter people who join your organization. So this is becoming increasingly part of the norm of the sort of people experience. The other one, and this is maybe more the picture on the right-hand side, is around sales training to some extent. And so how do you know that somebody's ready to do their virtual pitch? Why don't you get them to do a virtual pitch, right? Get them to record it, and then they can get feedback from product owner, their peers, their manager, about what they would do to make it better. And I know this is a feature that you guys at SAP Litmus have been using for a while, but it seems to be really relevant now. You go through an element of pre-course checking, you now have a product to sell. Why not pre-sell it, so to speak, to the people around you to understand how that really goes down?
Yeah, this is a really popular feature for Litmus customers. So you can attach a video assessment to a course as part of completing that course. And it's really cool. I mean, especially because in this day and age, so many of us who are office workers, quote unquote, are pretty comfortable with being on video. It's not like it was a long time ago where people, oh, I don't want to turn my camera on. I won't, Now we're all on camera a lot, and it's become something that and even in our personal lives, we're FaceTiming each other, and people have gotten so much more comfortable with seeing themselves on camera. And I think maybe that is another reason why the video assessments feature in Litmus has become very, very popular, but also extremely useful. And we have, it actually ties in the AI piece as well, David. So with our feature, there are kind of multi-layered feedback capabilities where, of course, you can have the human feedback where your manager, or as you say, the peers or whatever,
Yeah.
The salesperson is the easiest example to use. They do their pitch or they do their demo intro or whatever it is, and then they can get the human feedback. But we also have AI capabilities built into it where you can customize it to say, we want to make sure that these keywords are mentioned during the pitch. We want to make sure that this, particular line of messaging is included. We want to measure for ums and ahs and pauses, and all that stuff can be built in from a machine intelligence standpoint as well, which is really cool, and people love it. So.
Yeah, but that immediacy of feedback, though, and again, thinking back to the generational shifts and the importance of having that immediate feedback, it is huge, right? And I think if you could think of it not just about being sales, it could be contact center. How do you handle this sort of inquiry? Did you use the right keywords? And just to get that immediate coaching of, that would have been a really painful conversation with a human being. I got a chance to rehearse that and polish things up, so that I felt much more confident in dealing with that maybe difficult situation on the phone or face to face. And I think that's a huge step forward. To be sort of positive, right? It's not just, you talk about almost, what's the word, video assessment, but it's like video reflection, right? It's holding up a mirror and say, this is what it looked like. And what a great way to sort of help people navigate this sort of this time to some extent.
And you don't have to submit your first take. That's the cool thing about this idea of rehearsal and practice. You can, think about this generation that's growing up on TikTok, right? I mean, it's like, you don't have to submit your first run. You can really perfect it, and then you can submit it to your boss. So it's really cool.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And again, the open-endedness of that sort of encourage people to reflect and share. So if you're a new starter, what have you learned this week, right? That's the milestone. What have you learned this week that you'd share with the rest of the team that might surprise them, right? That's a difficult thing, It's like, but to sit down and say, this is what I learned. This is the thing that surprised me. It's a great learning point, right? Because it encourages people to have that reflection before they then go on to do the next things. That learning cycle connection, I think, is huge too. The other thing that I pick out is just this sense of performance management is something that actually, as we move into a hybrid world, actually how you get the most out of people, setting goals, thinking about continuous coaching. If you're a learning team that haven't got into that mindset of, actually, I need to coach people like they're athletes, to give them feedback so they can get the fine tuning to be even a higher performer, now's the time to embrace that. If you're in your learning silo, go and reach out to the performance management team and say, how could we improve the process to make it more human, make it more developmental? Because people need that. And that's a generational thing. It will create the stickiness of your organization to attract and retain people. It creates the right culture, going back to that situational leadership, and also the that whole sense of having the, what do I call it? Oh, it's gone out of my head.
I wish I knew what you were trying to think of. I would assist you.
It's in the slide deck. I should remember. But that whole sense is really important of sort of getting that caring leadership of thinking about the whole person is something that's really important.
Oh, are you referring to like the servant leader model?
Yeah, it's the servant leader mindset. Yeah, that's it. See, I've gone out of my head. But that's a good
and it was. I love that you refer to the servant leader model, and that one of our most popular courses this year has been the mindful leader.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty cool.
But that's that alignment, isn't it? Right. So how do you release more from people? You really help understand what they need to energize them, and I think that's crucial. The other thing is just this sense of linking skills to opportunities, and again, trying to look outside learning into talent mobility, as it's called, putting your hand up and saying, how can I take my skills and help people connect with their future opportunities, be they projects, be they gigs, be they new roles. Help people see those opportunities and connect your learning. That's really going to energize people around your offer. And finally, just to pick out this whole sense of getting onboarding right is something I'd really like to highlight. We talk about the 10 C's, so that's like connection, community, clarity, compliance, culture, competence, confidence, celebration, and care, and career. So show you care, help people understand where they're going with their career. Just use those as labels around your current onboarding and just give yourself a plus or negative score. It'll give you a sense of what you should be doing. So if you haven't got enough connection and community, then how do you foster that? Maybe you create some pre-boarding time where people can speak to the other virtual workers. in your organization who they're going to be joining in maybe a couple of weeks' time? How do you give people a sense of community? You keep those people together and give them a support network when they join. How do you understand they got clarity? You make sure give them really clear goals around deliverables, and make sure the managers are geared up around directing them about this is what you need to do next, but also their journey on onboarding. This is the X, Y, and Z of what you need to do in order to be successful, whether it's your compliance or other things. How does your onboarding express your culture? And that may be actually linked to community and connection, to get people to talk about what's it like to be here? How do you behave to really embed the values or to bring the values to life? And get other people to talk about what it means to bring those values into reality in your organization. That sense of celebration. Back in the day, people used to do their celebration of certain organizations. When you walked into the building the first time, they'd give you a round of applause. They'd have as many people as possible in the welcome in the foyer. It creates one of those real emotional impacts of, I feel valued here. And a great story for when you go back home and say, everybody applauded me as I walked into the office. A bit weird, but wow, I'm really valued, right? And then people talking about why they hired you and why you're so great at a hire, all those things. And then just show you care, right? And I think that's something that we also need to just think about. All those people who've been onboarded remotely, did they really feel as though they had a hug from the organization for joining? Until we thinking out to their career. And I think that's something that's a sort of overall, just sort of hold that mirror up to yourselves. But we sort of come to the end of a time in a way, and I'm conscious that's going over, but just to say, this is about taking a holistic view. And there's lots of things we sort of touched on, which are very learning focused, but trying to think about purpose. And you said that earlier on, Sam, think about how work's changing, how the generations, the people in work are changing, the innovation that we need to bring. Actually, that's the exciting moment for everybody, I think, as we sort of think about the critical trends in work and workforce and what it means for learning.
Well, this is just fantastic, David. I think you and I could go on for 2 hours.
That's true. That's very true.
We've barely scratched the surface, but as you said, we are out of time. So what that means is, this is great. I mean, unfortunately, we will have to follow up with questions after the fact. So we'll take that on. We'll take that on the Litmus and the Fosway side. So, but thank you, David. We do need to wrap up. But this has been a treasure trove of information, and I hope it stimulated a lot of thought for our audience. And I think everything, even though these are some challenges, things really are going in a positive direction. This is a great time to be in L&D, great time to be in HR. There are a lot of really positive changes that are underway.
Exactly, and a great time to innovate. And I know we're going to make the slide deck available, got the recording to make available, and also the slide deck you can download and pick out and go to the links of things you may have found interesting as well. So maybe hopefully this is a catalyst for people's journey to dig a little bit deeper.
So thanks so much to you, David, and thank you very much to Fosway Group. And with that, we will sign off. So thank you all very much for joining us today.
Thank you.